The conflict did not originate from the native. It was imposed upon them by settlers and soldiers representing the Great Father, the United States government, who sought to take their lands without fair compensation. The Native Americans had desired to live peacefully and pursue the well-being of their communities. However, the arrival of soldiers intent on their destruction disrupted their lives. Those who left to hunt or seek change were attacked by soldiers, preventing their safe return. The speaker, Sinta Galeshka, also known as Spotted Tail of the Brule Sioux, advocates for a peaceful resolution through dialogue rather than conflict. In the late summer and autumn of 1865, while Native American forces demonstrated their strength in the Powder River country, a United States Treaty Commission traveled along the upper Missouri River. The commission, led by Newton Edmonds, the governor of Dakota Territory, and Henry Sibley, who had previously driven the Santee Sioux from Minnesota, aimed to secure treaties with various Sioux groups. They distributed gifts and secured treaty signatures, despite knowing that the agreements were essentially meaningless, as no significant warrior chiefs participated. Colonel Henry Maynadier, who had been assigned to Fort Laramie as commander of the galvanized Yankee regiments, asked, "But what about Red Cloud?" he wanted to know. Where was Red Cloud, man afraid of his horses, Dull Knife, the leaders who had fought Connor's soldiers? He knew the treaties were meaningless without the warrior chief to sign them. By the spring of that year, the Civil War had ended, leading to an increase in westward migration. The treaty commissioners sought rights of passage for trails, roads, and railroads through Native American territories. By autumn, they had secured 9 treaties, but none were signed by the major warrior chiefs. Government officials in Washington falsely heralded these treaties as the end of hostilities, unaware that the real leaders of the Native American resistance were still actively fighting. Colonel Henry Maynadier at Fort Laramie attempted to negotiate with the key leaders of the resistance, including Red Cloud, but initially failed to secure intermediaries willing to enter the Powder River country. Eventually, he employed 5 Sioux who frequented the fort: Big Mouth, Big Ribs, Eaglefoot, Whirlwind, and Little Crow, known as the Laramie Loafers. These trader Indians were influential in trading and supplying munitions to the Native Americans during Red Cloud's war. Big Mouth and his party spread the word that fine gifts awaited the warrior chiefs at Fort Laramie if they signed new treaties. By January 1866, 2 destitute Brule bands led by Standing Elk and Swift Bear arrived, eager to sign the treaty and receive provisions. Spotted Tail, their leader, planned to come later due to his daughter's illness. Colonel Maynadier inquired about Red Cloud and other leaders, but the messengers assured him they would arrive soon. By March, Spotted Tail informed Maynadier of his imminent arrival to discuss the treaty, despite his daughter's death en route. Maynadier honored Spotted Tail's grief with a military funeral, showcasing the mutual respect and sorrow shared between the two cultures. When Red Cloud finally arrived in early May, he expressed his anger at the delay in the arrival of peace commissioners and demanded provisions. Maynadier could offer food but not weapons, leading Red Cloud to question the fairness of the treaties, which historically favored the white settlers. Maynadier suggested using the telegraph to communicate with the commission president in Omaha, which Red Cloud hesitantly agreed to, sending a message of peace and friendship. Initially, he didn't entirely trust in the magic of the talking wires. Commissioner Taylor responded, emphasizing the Great Father's desire for peace and promising supplies and gifts in June. Red Cloud, impressed by the response, agreed to wait for the treaty signing, planning to gather more resources and allies in the meantime. Maynadier provided some supplies as a goodwill gesture, and the Oglalas left in good spirits, postponing discussions on critical issues like the Bozeman Road and Fort Reno until the Treaty Council. Red Cloud returned in May with a large group of Oglalas joined by other tribes, forming a significant camp near Fort Laramie. The peace commissioners arrived in early June, initiating formal treaty discussions. Red Cloud requested a delay to await more participants, which Commissioner Taylor granted. However, on June 13th, Colonel Henry B. Carrington and his regiment arrived near Fort Laramie, intending to establish forts along the Bozeman Road. This military presence was a surprise to the Native Americans, who had not been informed about the planned occupation of their lands. Tensions rose as the Native American leaders, including Standing Elk and Red Cloud, voiced their opposition to the military incursion, emphasizing their willingness to fight for their lands. During the subsequent treaty discussions, the Native American leaders, including Man Afraid of His Horses and Red Cloud, expressed their anger and determination to resist the invasion of their territory. Red Cloud in particular criticized the peace commissioners for treating the Native Americans like children and pretending to negotiate while preparing for conquest. He declared that the Native Americans preferred to die fighting rather than starve due to the loss of their lands and resources. The arrival of Carrington's regiment and the construction of Fort Phil Kearny in the heart of Native American hunting grounds intensified the conflict. Despite initial attempts at negotiation, the Native Americans, led by Red Cloud, engaged in relentless guerrilla warfare, targeting military and civilian wagon trains along the Bozeman Road. Red Cloud's war strategies and battles. By the summer of 1866, the Native Americans had developed a strategic plan to cut off supplies and isolate Carrington's troops, making travel on the Bozeman Road dangerous and difficult. Red Cloud's leadership and the increasing number of allies made the resistance formidable. The construction of additional forts, such as Fort C.F. Smith, further provoked the Native Americans, leading to continuous attacks and skirmishes. The conflict, known as Red Cloud's War, highlighted the determination of the Native Americans to protect their lands and way of life against the encroachment of white settlers and military forces. Despite the U.S. government's attempts to secure treaties and establish control, the Native American resistance persisted, resulting in ongoing violence and hardship for both sides. The Battle of the 100 Slain, also known as the Fetterman Massacre. Red Cloud, a prominent Oglala Lakota leader, and other chiefs orchestrated a series of strategic maneuvers against the U.S. Army stationed at Fort Phil Kearny. High Backbone and Yellow Eagle, along with a young Crazy Horse, employed elaborate decoys to lure soldiers into traps. On December 6, 1866, they used mirrors and flags to signal troop movements, eventually causing the soldiers to scatter in confusion. High Backbone and Yellow Eagle, along with about 100 warriors, set up an ambush near Fort Phil Kearny. They effectively deceived the soldiers, who chased the decoys only to be surrounded and attacked by the concealed warriors. The soldiers fell into their traps. Early in the moon of popping trees, they began tantalizing the woodcutters in the pinery and the soldiers guarding the wagons which brought wood to Fort Phil Kearny. On December 6th, a day with a cold wash of air flowing down the slopes of the Bighorns, High Backbone and Yellow Eagle took about 100 warriors and dispersed them at various points along the Pinery Road. Red Cloud was with another group of warriors who took positions along the ridgetops. They flashed mirrors and waved flags to signal the movements of the troops to High Backbone and his decoys. Before the day was over, the Indians had the Bluecoats dashing about in all directions. At one time, the Little White Chief Carrington came out and gave chase. Choosing just the right moment, Crazy Horse dismounted and showed himself on the trail in front of one of Carrington's hot-blooded young cavalry officers, who immediately led a file of soldiers galloping in pursuit. As soon as the soldiers were strung out along the narrow trail, Yellow Eagle and his warriors sprang from concealment in their rear. In a matter of seconds, the Indians swarmed over the soldiers. This was the fight in which Lieutenant Horatio Bingham and Sergeant G.R. Bowers were killed, and several soldiers severely wounded. In their camps that night and for several days following, the chiefs and warriors talked of how foolishly the Bluecoats had acted. Red Cloud was sure that if they could entice a large number of troops out of the fort, 1,000 Indians armed with only bows and arrows could kill them all. Sometime during the week, the chiefs agreed that after the coming of the next full moon, they would prepare a great trap for the Little White Chief and his soldiers. By the third week of December, everything was in readiness, and about 2,000 warriors began moving south out of the lodges along the tongue. The weather was very cold, and they wore buffalo robes with the hair turned in, leggings of dark woolen cloth, high-topped buffalo fur moccasins, and carried red Hudson's Bay blankets strapped to their saddles. Most of them rode pack horses, leading their fast-footed war ponies by lariats. Some had rifles, but most were armed with bows and arrows, knives and lances. They carried enough pemmican to last several days, and when an opportunity offered, small groups would turn off the trail, kill a deer, and take as much meat as could be carried on their saddles. About 10 miles north of Fort Phil Kearny, they made a temporary camp in 3 circles of Sioux, Cheyennes, and Arapahoes. Between the camp and the fort was the place selected for the ambush, the little valley of Pennow Creek. On the morning of December 21st, the chiefs and medicine men decided the day was favorable for a victory. In the first gray light of dawn, a party of warriors started off in a wide circuit toward the wood train road, where they would make a feint of attack. 10 young men who had been selected for bravery above all others rode out to act as decoys. Among them were Crazy Horse, Hump, and Little Wolf. When they were ready to lure the soldiers from the fort, Crazy Horse rode out boldly and waved his red blanket, taunting them with wild war cries. The young men pretended to be the vanguard of a much larger war party, which made an initial feint against the wood train and then doubled back to Lodge Trail Ridge. As the soldiers from the fort pursued them, Crazy Horse and the other decoys moved back slowly, always staying just out of range, drawing the soldiers deeper into the trap. When the decoys reached the valley of Pennow Creek, they crossed over and the soldiers followed. All 81 of the cavalrymen and infantrymen were now within the jaws of the ambush. The decoys gave the signal, and at once the attack began. Little Horse of the Cheyennes, who was in charge of the signal, waved a blanket over his head. With a thunder of hooves, the mounted Cheyennes and Arapahoes charged. From the opposite side, the Sioux attacked. The fighting was fierce and hand-to-hand. The infantrymen were soon all killed, and the cavalrymen retreated to a rocky height. Little Horse distinguished himself in the fight by leaping over the rocks to get close to the besieged cavalrymen. White Bull of the Minneconjous also distinguished himself by charging a dismounted cavalryman and killing him with an arrow and lance. Toward the end of the fight, arrows from both sides hit Indians, and then it was over. Not a single soldier was left alive. This battle, known to white men as the Fetterman Massacre and to Indians as the Battle of the 100 Slain, resulted in nearly 200 Indian casualties. The Fetterman Massacre had a profound impact on Colonel Carrington, who was appalled by the mutilations he saw. He eventually wrote an essay on the subject, attributing the actions to paganistic beliefs. However, had he visited the Sand Creek Massacre scene, where Colonel Chivington's soldiers mutilated Indians 2 years earlier, he would have realized the Indians were imitating their enemies. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of history. Your support helps us bring more content like this to you. Thank you. Aftermath and legacy. The Fetterman Massacre deeply affected the U.S. government, marking a significant moment in Red Cloud's war. It was a testament to the Native Americans' resolve and capability in resisting the encroachment on their lands. The continued Native American resistance under Red Cloud's leadership eventually forced the U.S. government to reconsider its approach. This led to the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, which temporarily halted the construction of the Bozeman Road and resulted in the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the forts in the Powder River country. Red Cloud's War and the subsequent treaty underscored the profound impact of Native American resistance during this period. The conflict was a significant chapter in the long history of Native American struggles against U.S. expansion and serves as a powerful reminder of their enduring fight to protect their lands, culture, and sovereignty.